Welcome to First Sleep Aid, calm stories to help you unwind, learn, and fall asleep. From true crime to curious facts and thoughtful ideas, always softly spoken. Subscribe now and take a deep breath. You're in good hands. Picture this, right? It's May 26, 1828, and suddenly this teenage boy just appears, like out of thin air in Nuremberg.
Just shows up.
He can barely talk, he's carrying this letter, and the story he tells, I mean, it's wild.
Yeah, you're not kidding.
He says he spent his whole life alone, in darkness, so obviously everyone's just like, whoa, who is this Kaspar Hauser? Where did he even come from?
It's like something out of a novel.
But like, under all the crazy claims, what's the actual truth?
Right, right, and that's what's so captivating. I mean, it's a total mystery from the 1800s that still feels, unfinished.
We're missing pieces.
Totally, and in this deep dive, we're going to try to untangle some of those threads. I mean, we're going to look at everything.
Lay it all out.
Yeah, so we'll have one of us sort of tracing, like, the known timeline of Kaspar's life, what he did, how he acted, all that.
The stuff we can be pretty sure about.
Exactly. And then the other one will be looking at how the public reacted to him, when he just kind of popped up. Plus all the theories that people came up with about who he was.
Yeah. Like, was he a prince? Was he a fake?
Exactly. And we'll even touch on some of the, psychological interpretations, what could explain his behavior.
If you look at it from a modern point of view.
Exactly. And through it all, we're going to be careful, right, to separate what we know for sure, the documented stuff, from, the stuff that's just, speculation.
It's guesswork.
Yeah, the best guesses.
So let's go back to the beginning. May 26th, 1828, Nuremberg. This young guy, maybe 16, 17 years old, he just appears.
This materializes?
Wearing, really basic clothes, and he can hardly communicate.
Like the bare minimum.
Right, and he gives this letter to a cavalry captain.
What did it say? What was the gist?
It basically said, this is Kaspar Hauser. He's been kept isolated his whole life, and he wants to be a cavalryman, supposedly like his dad. That's what it said.
Like his dad, huh? Interesting.
His vocabulary was super limited. He'd say things like, I want to be a cavalryman like my father, or, just horse.
That's so striking, to think about that. Like someone completely cut off from, normal life.
Right. Like, how do you even begin to understand the world at that point?
Right. A total blank slate almost.
So, of course, the authorities, they take him in, and he ends up with this guy, George Friedrich Dahmer.
Dahmer.
Yeah, and this is where things get interesting, because over that summer, Kaspar starts developing really fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing how quickly he learned.
Dahmer was teaching him, and Kaspar, he just soaked it all up. Speaking, reading, writing, the whole 9 yards.
Like a sponge.
Total sponge, and people who knew him then said he had, this crazy good memory, and he was really curious about everything.
Yeah, I mean, after being supposedly shut away for so long, you can imagine.
Right, everything must have been so new and exciting.
Totally, but, and here's the thing, there's this contrast. Alongside this super fast learning, there were signs of trauma.
Like he was holding back.
Yeah, nightmares, totally hating loud noises, and these, emotional outbursts, really intense.
It makes you wonder, was that isolation he talked about, was it truly a total blank? Or were there things that happened to him, bad things?
That messed him up.
Right, that left him with these scars.
I'd have to think so.
Absolutely. And it's that speed of his learning alongside these signs of, distress that really raises question.
Yeah.
Then, a little over a year later, October 1829, something else happens. The first attack.
Right, this is big.
Yeah, so Kaspar was found in Dahmer's cellar, hurt with a head wound.
Oh, wow.
And he said that this guy, wearing a hood, had attacked him with a razor.
A razor, geez. And
told him to keep quiet about his past.
Oh, so there's, a threat?
Right, a direct threat, and this changes everything, whether the attack was exactly how he described it or something else.
Because now there's danger.
Right, it introduces this idea that maybe he was in danger or that there was some kind of plot against him.
Some conspiracy or something.
Exactly, it really shifts how people were looking at his situation.
Absolutely, it makes it way more intense.
So then, from 1830 to 1832, Kaspar is moved around, to different households, supposedly to keep him safe.
Keep an eye on him.
Right, and to keep studying him, and it's during this time that he becomes this public figure.
Almost like a celebrity.
Yeah, he was all over the place. I mean, nobles, scientists, intellectuals, they all wanted to meet him.
To see this, wild child or whatever they thought he was.
Right, this enigma, but all this attention, it starts to create some doubt, you
Yes,
know?
of some pushback.
Some people were convinced he was from some noble family, but others started noticing things in his stories, like details that didn't add up.
Inconsistencies.
Right, and that made them think, well, maybe he's not who he says he is.
Makes sense.
And this back and forth, this believing him versus not believing him, it goes on until December 14th, 1833, when things take a really tragic turn.
Ah, this is the
fatal attack.
Right.
So Kaspar comes home with a stab wound to the chest, and it's bad. And he says that someone lured him to the Ansbach Palace Gardens and attacked him there, and 3 days later, he dies from the wound.
That's awful.
It's a terrible ending, and to make things even weirder, they find a note folded up with him.
Another note.
Yeah, but this one was in mirror writing.
Mirror writing, like you need a mirror to read it.
Exactly. It's written backwards, and the note itself was like cryptic, talking about his identity, but in this really vague way.
Wow. Talk about a mystery.
Right. And of course, everyone starts arguing, was this a real clue from his attacker, or did he write it himself, like right before he died?
Yeah, was he trying to say something?
And the mirror writing itself, it's so unusual. It just added fuel to the fire. Everyone was speculating.
So we've got this timeline, all these events, but we also have Kaspar's behavior, right? Which was strange, let's say.
Yeah, there were definitely some unusual things about him.
So what were some of the key observations, things that people noticed about him psychologically, behaviorally?
Well, for one thing, he apparently hated meat and alcohol, which was pretty weird for the time.
Picky eater, huh?
Yeah, and he was also super sensitive emotionally. Like, he'd react really strongly to things that other people wouldn't even bat an eye at.
Sensitive to stimulation. Makes you wonder if that ties back to the isolation.
Maybe there were also signs that he might have had some trauma or maybe some developmental delays, which, could fit with the whole being isolated thing.
Right, if he wasn't around other people, he wouldn't develop the same way.
But then, as we said, he was also a really fast learner. Like, he picked things up so quickly.
Yeah, that's the paradox, right? Like damaged, but also gifted.
Exactly. And then there were the times when his stories, they kind of changed or they got fuzzy.
Unreliable narrator.
Yeah, and understandably, that made some people doubt if he was telling the truth.
If he was being straight with them.
So, if we look at all this from a modern perspective, from like a psychology point of view.
What are some of the theories, the explanations people have come up with?
Well, one idea is selective mutism. Maybe that's why he didn't speak at first.
Interesting. Like, he could, but he chose not to.
Right, and some people have even suggested that maybe he was on the autism spectrum based on some of his behaviors.
That makes sense.
Then there's dissociative trauma, which could be from like really bad isolation or abuse. That's a strong possibility.
Yeah, if he was really mistreated, that could explain a lot.
And then, of course, there's the theory that maybe he made the whole thing up, either consciously or unconsciously.
Like he created this persona.
Right. Maybe he wanted attention, or maybe someone was putting him up to it. We can't rule that out.
Especially with those inconsistencies.
Right. They do make you wonder.
So we've got the timeline, we've got how he acted. Now let's dive into the big theories that tried to explain Kaspar Hauser.
The explanations.
Yeah, and one that really took hold was the idea that he was a royal child, specifically the Prince of Baden.
That's the one that really captured everyone's imagination.
Like a fairy tale, right?
Totally. So the basic idea is that Kaspar was the real heir to the Grand Duchy of Baden, born in 1812.
So like a hidden prince?
Exactly. And the theory goes that he was kidnapped as a baby, so someone else could take his place in line for the throne.
To get him out of the way.
And to hide the crime, they switched him with a baby who was dying.
Oh, wow. That's cold.
Yeah, super dark. And then they kept Kaspar hidden for years, and the idea is that they let him go to cause a scandal or to blackmail someone.
To like shake things up.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild theory.
So what did the people who believed this theory, what did they point to as evidence?
Well, they often said it was because he seemed so noble, even when he first showed up. Like, he had a certain air about him.
Like a natural grace.
Yeah, and they also said that he learned manners really quickly, like he was used to them.
And he's all coming back to him.
And then there were some scars he had, or maybe some injuries, and they thought that was proof that he'd been mistreated while he was being held captive.
Like signs of abuse.
But there were some big criticisms of this theory, too.
Holes in the story.
Yeah, the biggest one being that there's no real proof that Kaspar was actually related to the Baden family.
Like no birth records, no nothing.
No solid evidence. And then they did DNA tests in 1996, 2002, and even recently in 2024.
Wow, so they're still looking into it.
And all those tests either came back inconclusive or showed that he wasn't a match for the Baden family.
So debunking the theory.
Yeah, it weakens it a lot, although DNA evidence isn't always perfect, especially with old cases.
Right, it's not 100%.
But still, it makes you think, why did this theory stick around for so long if there's no real proof?
Because it's a good story, right?
It's a great story. It's way more interesting than, just a regular guy showing up.
Way more romantic.
Yeah, it's the hidden prince. It captures the imagination.
Totally. Even without the proof, people want to believe it.
It's like a fairy tale gone wrong.
Exactly. But then on the other side, we have the theory that Kaspar Hauser was just a fake, a total fraud.
The complete opposite.
Yeah, so what are the main arguments for that theory?
Well, the people who believe that say that Kaspar could never really describe his time in captivity. He was always vague about it, and the details would change.
Like he couldn't keep his stories straight.
And some people thought that he actually gave himself those injuries, like that head wound, to get sympathy.
To make people feel sorry for him.
And they also pointed to the handwriting in that final note. They said it looked a lot like Kaspar's own writing.
So maybe he wrote it himself.
Maybe. And then there's the fact that he'd change his story depending on who he was talking to. That made people suspicious.
Like he was tailoring it to his audience.
Exactly. So if he was a fraud, the big question is why? What was his motive?
And was he working alone?
Right. Was someone pulling the strings?
Was he a pawn in some bigger game?
We just don't know. And that's what's so frustrating. If he was faking it, we don't know why.
It's like this huge question mark.
But then there's another theory, sort of a middle ground between the royal prince and the total fake. It's called the trauma theory.
The trauma theory. Okay, so this is like a compromise.
Yeah, it says that Kaspar wasn't a prince and he wasn't intentionally lying, but he was a kid who had a really rough childhood.
A really bad one.
Maybe he was isolated or abused or both, and he just didn't have a normal upbringing. No social skills, no education.
Like he was deprived of everything.
And this theory says that he might have made up the story about being locked up to explain why he didn't know things, why he acted differently.
So as a way to cope?
Yeah, like a defense mechanism, or maybe it was a way to escape from his past, mentally.
Create a new reality for himself?
And this theory could explain some of his strange behavior, like not speaking at first, being so sensitive, and even changing his story sometimes.
It all fits, in a way.
It does, and it means you don't have to believe in any crazy conspiracies or think he was deliberately lying.
It simplifies things.
Yeah, it makes him more of a tragic figure, someone who was really hurt and was just trying to make sense of the world.
And then you brought up those DNA tests earlier, which is crazy to think about, that even with all our fancy technology, we still don't know for sure who he was.
It really shows how much of a mystery this is. I mean, we can't even definitively link him to the Baden family, and the tests haven't given us any other leads either.
So we're still in the dark.
Totally. It makes you think DNA isn't always the answer, especially when we know so little about someone's life, about their past.
And when the information we do have is so unreliable.
It also shows how hard it is to prove or disprove things that happened so long ago. There's only so much evidence.
And it's all open to interpretation.
But beyond all the investigations and the science, Kaspar Hauser's story had this huge impact on people back then and even now. He was like a celebrity.
Like a viral sensation before the internet.
Exactly. Why do you think that is?
It's a good question. What is it about his story that grabs people?
Well, I think it touches on some really basic things about being human. Like, it makes us think about how we treat children and about nature versus nurture. Are we born a certain way, or does our environment shape us?
Big questions.
Huge questions. And then there's the whole idea of identity and belonging and how we treat people who are different, who don't fit in.
Yeah, Cass.
Kaspar was like the ultimate outsider. He had no connection to society, and people reacted to him with all these different emotions: pity, fear, curiosity.
They didn't know what to make of him.
It's almost like we're drawn to these stories, these blank slates that make us question what it means to be human.
It's like looking in a mirror, but a distorted one.
And his story didn't just fade away. It's inspired so much art and literature, and it's still studied by psychologists.
Yeah, he's popped up everywhere.
There are tons of books, plays, and of course there's Werner Herzog's movie, The Enigma of Kaspar Hauser. That's a classic.
I need to watch that.
You do. It's really good. And psychologists are still trying to figure him out. He's like this real-life puzzle that makes us think about how the mind works and how much our early experiences matter.
Like how much they define us?
And even his gravestone says something like the riddle of his time, which is so fitting.
He's like a walking question mark.
Totally. So here we are at the end of this deep dive, and the case of Kaspar Hauser is still unsolved.
We still don't have a neat answer.
No, we don't know for sure who he was, where he came from, or what really happened to him.
It's frustrating, but also kind of exciting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, was he a prince who got robbed of his life, or a really good liar, or just a kid who went through something awful and created this whole fantasy world?
We just don't know.
But even without knowing the answer, his story still fascinates us. Why do you think that is?
It's the mystery, right? The unanswered questions.
I think it's more than that. I think it's because Kaspar Hauser represents something bigger. It's about the search for identity, the damage that trauma can do, and the blurry lines between truth and lies.
It's like he holds up a mirror to humanity, and what we see is, like, fractured.
And his life, even though it was short and full of mystery, reminds us how fragile our own identities are and how many secrets one person can hold.
It makes you think, what would I do in that situation?
Exactly. And which theory do I believe and why?
It's like he's still asking us those questions, even after all this time.
And maybe we'll never have the answers, but that's part of what makes his story so powerful.
It keeps us searching.
It keeps us wondering.